This is a very special I Read Comic Books Minisode episode, something that we do every once in a while where we have two fantastic human beings as guests on our show. And this week I'm joined by someone that you already know, Nick White.
Hey.
And I am also joined by comic book creators extraordinaires, Cooper Anderson.
Hey, everybody.
And A.C. Ironside.
Hi, guys.
Thank you for joining us. We are so excited today because we are talking to Cooper and A.C. about their new book that's coming out, Inner Workings, a modern retelling of the Jekyll and Hyde story. Cooper, A.C., could you guys tell us a little bit about what this book is, where you're coming from with it, and I guess what the book's all about?
Sure. I'll get things started off. So this past year, I've been working on my master's degree in creative writing from the University of Glasgow. And one of the assignments that I really wanted to do was I wanted to create a comic book. And I've always really liked the idea of playing with the duality taking place within a single person. And there's no really better embodiment of that than Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, the book's already been done, and the comic book adaptation of the original Robert Louis Stevenson books, that's already been done. Mm-hmm. So I was like, what happens if we do it in modern times? So I was like, oh, that'd be really fun to play with, just because, especially now in this modern world, we seem to be this, where like there's like a line between good and evil, and that line is always shifting, and now it's becoming more blurred and stuff. So I wanted to see what those two characters would do in a modern setting, and how they would adjust to something like that, and what are the options they would take, and what are the choices they would make as far as their own life going from there. And then I started writing the comic book, and I realized very early on, wow, I can't draw for shit. So,
okay.
And I just happened to mention the project to AC over here, who was in one of my creative writing classes, and she's like, "Oh, I'm an artist," and I go, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah." So I pitched her the idea, and apparently I was pretty good at it because she said she wanted to do it, yeah. So it's been quite a long process of doing script edits, and then first draft artwork, and then changing art styles, and then so we're finally excited to get our book completed. We finally got it completed with the past couple of weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would like to say he was very convincing with involving pizza in the pitch. Because as a person who's been in university for way too long, anytime that there's food, I'm more likely to say yes.
Gotcha.
To the project.
Gotcha. So actually, it's interesting that you mentioned like the art style changes. I guess AC, could you go into like the process that you took in terms of like approaching the script that you were looking at, and then how you two came up with like this is the style that we want to go with for the book? Because Nick and I were lucky enough to actually get copies of this in advance and take a look through it and read it, and it's a gorgeous looking book. But I'm curious now to know like where did the art style change based off of where like maybe a first draft versus a second draft and so on?
Yeah, for sure. For me, I work mostly as an archaeological illustrator. So I do a lot of realism with like skeletons and human remains and grave goods. So jumping between doing that and going like straight from a dig site to coming back and working on the comic book meant that I was changing styles quite often. And because of that, it creates like a change within the artwork.
Okay.
And
so
because sorry.
I was no. I was just I want to put a pin in the I just came from a gravesite and come back to that. That's all.
It's so weird to actually have to draw skin on bones. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I also do like facial reconstruction, illustrations, and stuff like that. So it's a lot of variation within my work week. And because of that variation, my style tends to adjust to what I've been drawing most lately. So if I'm doing a lot of like realism, then my style tends to tilt towards more realism, and I have to like focus at looking at the earlier art and kind of like adjusting to go back to keep the style consistent throughout the comic book. Mm-hmm. And I know earlier this fall we had a moment where I was like just finishing my master's dissertation, and I had realized that my style for drawing Jekyll had completely changed. So I'm like messaging Coop and being like, do I have to redraw the entire comic? Because I will cry.
And I was like, no, because AC is great where she's the kind of person, which is similar to me, where she will like dive herself into the ground, working as hard as she possibly can for as long as she can. And we're similar like that. And I think that's why we work pretty well together as a creative force. But at that point, I was like, you nailed it the first time. Like, you hit a home run. You don't have to then go backwards and be like, no, pitch it again. Do a curveball this time. I could do better. Like, no, you got it right the first try. And which she did. I thought she did a great – she finished the cover first. And I immediately just fell in love with the artwork style right there. And then she gives me this new one, and it's not even that much different, but it's like it has more defined lines, and it plays more with the light versus dark motif. And I'm just like, we don't need any of this. You got it right the first try. We're good.
Yes, it was very reassuring to hear those words, because I'd literally just spent 3 weeks in a hole in like the Highlands of Scotland. So it was very nice to hear that, no, you're okay. Don't stress.
Wowzer. Nick, I'll let you jump in here if you've got something you want to dive into.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of my big questions was, obviously there must have been some big choices made in terms of what to sort of adapt from Jekyll and Hyde and what sort of to kind of wholeheartedly ignore. And I noticed one of the sort of core changes that kind of grabbed at my attention rather was that the physical transformation of Jekyll to Hyde was sort of omitted in favor of more of just an inner transformation. And I thought that was sort of based on what you were getting at in terms of just internal duality issues within one's own self. I was just wondering, were there other changes you looked at, or what were the core conceits behind making that change? Because obviously the whole idea of people not being able to even distinguish Jekyll from Hyde because there's such a huge physical difference was a core conceit of that book. And then you went and made it all internal, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Well, yeah. So one thing I want to point out, if you're like a student and you're reading this book because you don't want to read the original and you've got a book report due in 2 days, don't read this comic book for that. What I've done...
That's a very niche scenario, but I think
so what I've done was, so I reread the original book, and what I've done from there is I took kind of more tent poles of story. Like there's, like in story writing, there's a term called either saving the cat or like kicking the cat. Where it's the first sense of what you get to see of the main character. And in the original story, it has Hyde, like he just kind of like tramples a little girl, like he just runs her over in the street, and you clearly tell he's a bad guy from there. In this one, he fights neo-Nazis in a diner. So there's a bit of a difference when it comes to that. So what I did with the story is basically I took the kind of places of where story's going to go. And other than there's a big change at the end that I don't want to spoil just yet, but there's a big change from where the book ends to where this one's going to end. And just because I think it's much more interesting of a story because like you said, there's a physical transformation in the original book where people can't tell who he is. I like the fact that if you make that internal, I feel like that's a much more relatable subject for people, because I think a lot of times people ask, am I a good person? And I was like, if I find a wallet on the street, am I going to try to help find it? Or am I just going to take that $20 out of there and just leave it on the ground again? That kind of a thing. So it really plays with that inner voice in everyone's head of, do I do the good thing or do the bad thing? And I think that's a much more compelling story rather than, oh, I take this potion and then I suddenly turn into this evil person.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of struck with me is it sort of made me start to think about how even in this modern day and age, especially with like the internet, this idea that we're actively cultivating, multiple personalities without even thinking about it. Yeah, no, I thought that was a brilliant change. And I also, another thing that kind of caught my eye that I noticed, and I would love to know if this was a more mechanically driven decision or maybe more thematically, but at the beginning, the duality of Jekyll and Hyde is represented quite actively by two people, and as the book goes on, we see Hyde represented as this sort of even like a dark spectral energy kind of thing, and then as it goes on, Hyde sometimes gets referred to as just I refer to it as like a Sandman speech bubble, right? Where the text is white and the background is black.
I'm glad you noticed that. So AC did all the artwork and I did all the lettering, and I'm a massive Sandman fan, and I was like, oh, what's a better way to represent the embodiment of internal evil than to have just the reverse of a normal speech balloon and just have like a black background and then white lettering. So yeah, I'm just glad you noticed it.
Oh no, I thought that was a clever choice, and I was kind of wondering, were you slowly trying to guide the reader from saying like Hyde is a much more understandable sort of avatar being a person, and then abstracted that more down to the energy, and then abstracted that more down to the like text bubble, just so you wouldn't have to draw two characters all the time? Or
it's kind of more of I wanted story-wise is because he does first start off in the book as a very physical presence, like you see him on the page, and I wanted to make it very clear to the reader, and we're like, okay, this guy is clearly just in Jekyll's head. But we need it, but you can see that here, and then it's going to slowly shift just to being just the voice in his head, just because everyone kind of has that. Does that make sense?
I mean, I thought it was a really clever sort of piece of hand-holding for readers that maybe aren't as, what we say on the show is like visually literate in terms of how comics work.
Yeah.
So sort of moving them to that point where they can understand that Hyde is just a thought bubble, and I thought that was like really creative. And then I'm sure also I wasn't sure if it was also just the fact that you didn't want to have AC cluttering every single freaking frame with two characters.
That look really close to each other, and
it definitely helps with that. But it also, for me at least, my understanding of the script and my understanding that grew throughout the process was like him becoming more of like a voice within the head and being more of like a black, like almost like shadow figure version of Jekyll, was kind of like Jekyll almost like getting to know him a little bit more, and like realizing he's part of him, not just a separate thing that he can like put in a little compartment in his brain.
It's definitely like I wanted the people to identify with both Jekyll and both Hyde, because I wanted them both to have points on society as it is now, to where, you can definitely see, oh, this person's right, and also this person's right, and that's where the internal conflict has always come, I thought, from those characters, is that they're both right, and they both think they're right, and they're both willing to fight, and then the arch of that story is eventually they're either going to either kill each other, or they're going to have to accept each other and then work together. So it's going to be one of those two things.
Yeah, that was the thing that I was a little torn. I mean, I will admit I wasn't hugely familiar with the Jekyll and Hyde story outside of the other myriad of folks that have like taken this story and then kind of twisted it into like cartoons and things like that. And so I was like, hold on a second, am I supposed to be relating to the antagonist? He's the bad guy, right? Like I was a little torn. I was like, okay. And I mean, of course, as the story goes on, I mean, it is, I think, a little bit clearer on that, especially once we get near the very cool twist part of the book. But yeah, that was definitely something where I'm like, hold on, we're actually, who am I supposed to be rooting for here?
Yeah.
Mike did some real soul searching.
Yes, I did. Coming out of this book.
Yeah, sounds like it.
I know for me, like even within my own writing and within my other artwork, independent of this project, I'm very into gray areas, and I'm making people like question whether or not they should be liking the villain, and realizing that a villain isn't necessarily someone who's fully evil, and a hero isn't someone who's fully good. So I know for me that was something that attracted me to the project as well.
Definitely.
Well, I mean, I know after Mike read the book, he texted me and said, robbing a bank, BRB, and so I know things turned out just fine.
Listen,
so,
I had to steal that money for my family who needed money, okay?
Podcasts aren't cheap, okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
We don't have a sponsor.
Exactly. You can go rob stamps.com right now. It's like, we gave you a choice.
So you mentioned that you pulled some of the lettering stuff from, or like some ideas for how to put together some of the lettering from Sandman. I'm curious to know what other kind of comics are you guys into beyond just Sandman? Are there other things that you're currently reading, or other things that maybe inspired you while you were putting this book together?
For me, I'm always a big fan of especially now there's a Netflix series, of the Lock and Key by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez.
Yeah.
They're a big, massive hit, I thought, because it was such a good way to tell stories. Saga by Brian K. Vaughan, and is it Fiona Staples?
Yeah.
Is that her name? Yeah. Okay. I keep wanting to say Fiona Apples, but that's someone else. And a lot of things that are coming out of Image Comics, I'm a really big fan of. What's the one? I think it's called Crowded. I think it's
the Chris Sabella book. That's a really cool book.
Yeah, I've just got into it this week, so I'm excited to finally to catch up basically on that story.
Gotcha.
I like how he remembers a bunch of names of authors and like can list off titles and stuff. For me, I came to comics very much in a roundabout way. I came by just starting to going to conventions.
Okay.
So like, I would just go to conventions, and like I went with one of my friends who was really into like digital art, and we would have our little table and be selling our little posters and just be completely overwhelmed by the like comic book artists that were there, and then the like celebrity guests that were invited. And for me, it came like that way. And I wouldn't say like I have a specific like favorite. Like right now I'm reading like comics online, and I'm reading like Lore Olympus is the one I'm obsessed with because of the art style.
Oh yeah.
But, like,
Webtoons.
Yeah.
Webtoons is being my crack right now. But to be fair, I haven't had a lot of time to read lately, thanks to Cooper.
No, that's all right. Lore Olympus is all we need to know. We know you have good taste. That's fine. Well, that's cool. I just was curious because I look at this book and I feel like there's some manga inspiration, I mean, and Western comic inspiration, but like every once in a while I've been reading through a lot of like One Piece right now. I'm taking the plunge and trying to read through all of that, and I'm just like see little bits and pieces. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. I love the way some of that style works, and it totally works, especially with this book being black and white with some like grays. And I was actually going to wonder or ask you guys if you had plans to maybe do like a color edition, or if you were going to do like color covers or anything, if you did things printed, seeing that the whole book, at least in the file that we had, is all black and white.
If we get enough people to buy it, then I don't see why we couldn't do a color version. Yeah, I think with anyone who's doing indie comics, everything depends on what kind of audience you can reach and how many people actually purchase the book and that kind of thing. But I've never been opposed to doing a colored version. And real quick, going back to what you're talking about, it's definitely inspired by manga a lot. At least the original manga was because when we first tried this, we first started doing the art digitally, and it came out really good. But we're both perfectionists, and we're both like, oh, we can both do better. We can both do better with this.
And it was killing my eyes.
That too, yeah. With those really late nights in front of a screen, they're not great for irises.
Oh yeah.
So we did like a first draft of it, of the first like 10 pages, and we were like, oh, we could probably do better. And I was like, let me do the lettering. I'll handle lettering. And she was like, well, I'll hand draw stuff, and then we'll ink it like they used to do the old style manga artists. These now manga artists, they actually use digitally, but back in old school manga, it used to be just pencil and ink, and then we just scanned all the pages in from there. So yeah, there's definitely a big influence from like the Japanese manga culture.
And I would definitely say if we we're going to do a color version, I would want to stick with doing like hand coloring. Like I am still playing with digital, and I do like some of my reconstruction drawings I do digitally. It's just I love the like feel of actually putting pen to paper. And that's one of the main reasons that like my digital, like I do it, but I don't do it all the time. And if I can get away with not doing it, I will.
Gotcha. You're resistant to the changing times. I get it. That's totally fine.
I am.
I'm kidding.
It was good. But going back to like, I don't know if we could probably get a colored version out before this. Thing is like, one thing I hope I did enough was leave enough questions. Like it's a good enough complete story in this book, but there's definitely room, I think, for a volume 2. That I would love to do a volume 2.
About to ask.
Oh, were you? Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's stuff that happens in the book that they don't have answers, but you don't need answers at the time. But they're like, but volume 2, which the story I already have in the back of my head, would definitely answer all of them, and it would just expand upon the, I guess, Jekyll and Hyde universe if we're using easy, if we're using easy terms,
Mm-hmm.
it would definitely expand upon the mythology of just the concept of Jekyll and Hyde, and it would just kind of just expand it even further, because it definitely has a lot of open-ended avenues that we could take with it.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of characters that I know myself I've fallen in love with and have been like harassing him that like they need to be in there more if we're doing a volume 2.
Yep.
Bring them back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
I could definitely see that.
But I think your book also uniquely has the advantage of, if you never did a volume 2, I feel like you've left things in a place that would be perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's definitely that's one thing I really like about really well-crafted TV shows. You know, if a season ends, it wraps up on a good enough point where, you know what, maybe I won't have all the answers, but it's a good complete story. It wraps up everything that needs to be wrapped up in order for it to be a full cycle hero's journey. And then if there's more after that, it's kind of always a bonus. The thing is, where the challenge is, like, that next one has to be another full cycle, and then it's of a story, and it keeps going from there. Like a good example of this is the first season of Stranger Things. Like it has a great beginning, it has a great arc, it ends really well, and then it also has like a teaser, the very last scene of the whole show. And if it ended there, I don't think anyone really would complain that much that the show ended. But it kept going for another season and was really great.
I haven't watched Stranger Things yet.
Well, that's okay. We'll wait. You can start right now.
Yeah, we'll finish
Yeah,
this
we're gonna
once.
watch
we
I'll
finish
just
this
grab my
season.
charger
We'll just
from my
sit here like you
computer
watch
and
30
I'll just
hours of TV.
Now that I'm done, I have all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just kidding. I don't sleep.
So yeah, I guess so I was curious to know. I mean, I guess we've been talking about the book, and you guys are talking about like kind of how the collaboration process worked. Were there sections in the book? I mean, obviously we don't want to get too deep into spoilers or anything. Were there sections in the book where maybe the script came in and AC, you were like, well, what if we approach this scene this way, or what if we approach this section of a chapter this way? Because the book's broken up into a couple different chapters, which I really liked, because as I said, I was reading a lot of manga and I'm like, oh, this is perfectly digestible little chunks for me to like keep going with the story, and it felt like I didn't have to stop because there were these punctuated marks throughout the book, like, you know, like a good prose book in chapters and stuff like that. But anyways, were there scenes and I guess parts of the story that you guys changed on the fly as you were putting the art together?
Well, one of the nice things that he let me do before I started drawing was I sat next to him and read the script and edited it and told him to cut certain bits out, and was very mean at 12 o'clock at night numerous times.
Yeah.
So even before we got to the drawing section, we were already, like, I was already kind of like sticking my opinion in there and molding it.
One thing that, also one thing I really enjoyed is there are a couple female characters in this book, and one thing that I really, really wanted to do, I wanted to get authentic, like, female voices. Like, I wanted if there was an actual female person in this book, what is a true way they would react in this very bizarre situation? Mm-hmm. So I would write a scene, and then I would go to her and be like, hey, does this sound like something a woman would say? And a lot of times she'd say yes, and then I'm like, no, women don't do that, dude. I'm like, yep, you're right. All right, I'm going to change this right now. And then I would write it again, and she's like, that's better. And so she was, for the script editing process, she was ruthless. It was a lot of red pen marks on my script. I was like, nope, cut this, you cut this, and I'm like, oh, okay. But that's kind of the advantage of working with someone whose art style you really respect, is they have their own opinions, and if you listen to them, they usually have good ideas. Mm-hmm.
Usually? Huh?
You have a lot of good ideas.
All right, anyway, that's the end of the episode. Clearly, we've reached a...
All right, guys, we found my body buried somewhere. I definitely don't know who did it.
Well, yeah.
But I don't know who did it, but I have some really great drawings of my corpse.
Yeah.
Give it 50 years, I'll excavate it. It's fine.
I feel like we've just gotten the plot for something. It might not be volume 2, but you might have another work.
But no, I feel like we definitely worked well together.
I think one thing is if you were a writer, if you're a comic book writer, and you want something that's inside your head, you have a clear vision of what you want your book to be, the way you're going to get it exactly the way that's inside your head is you're going to go pick up a pen and a pencil and you're going to go draw it yourself. Otherwise, you need to find someone who can actually draw better than you, and then you have to work with them and you have to listen to their ideas, and you're going to find out what works and what doesn't work, and you listen to them, and that's the way you get a comic book made. Otherwise, you have to do it yourself. You do everything yourself, and then it'll be fine. Otherwise, yeah. And that's just kind of the advice I give to. Is I hear a lot of writers like, I just talked to on social media. They were like, well, it kind of works like this, but I kind of want to look like this. And like, does it work better as a story? And they're like, well, yeah. Then leave it at that. The artist, you have to trust your artist. Your artist knows what they're doing. That's why they're the artist.
I think both author and artist have to be open to compromise too.
Yeah.
Because like the author will have a vision for how they want their character to look like, and I can't just decide, no, I'm going to go the polar opposite of that, and that's going to be fine. Because the author is making a decision for how they dress, how they look to advance the story. Mm-hmm. So like it is room for compromise on both sides, and I'm not like that mean though. It's just like, no, you're not getting any say about your characters.
Uh-huh. She gets mad at me because I keep wanting my characters to have big anime hair, and she's like, "Not everyone can have anime hair.
We can't all go Super Saiyan at the same time, Cooper."
It's like I don't want people playing Spot the Pro Tag on every page. Like we can.
One thing I did really enjoy about the book, and I'd be curious to hear more about, are the chapter intros and sort of closing wrap up portions where you found clever ways to sort of weave the chapter title or whatnot into the beginning of the chapter. I'm curious to hear more about how that came about, just sort of using either receipts or police tape or things like that to kind of set the scene. I thought that was a really clever and an interesting way to sort of set the mood.
Yeah, I agree.
For wrapping or starting chapters.
Yeah. Well, I knew that when it comes to like lettering, I either had to do one thing, which is either I'm going to have one font for every beginning and end of every chapter. So every part's gonna have the same font, and it's gonna look the same because you need that kind of like uniformity for the reader to, as like a lifeline kind of, to get them to the next page. And I thought, okay, I can do that. I could definitely do that. But wouldn't
and then
it be
someone
cooler?
said no to Comic Sans, right? Is that how that went down? I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, I just thought wouldn't it be so much cooler that if every chapter had its own like font, it its own because it's the first thing of every chapter you see is either that first panel and then the title of that first chapter. And why don't we get started with this chapter with the tone, and you can portray tone in lettering, and that's what I really wanted to do. And then having the police tape on the end of one chapter, that was just me learning how to letter in the process of doing it. And I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if this was the police tape? And then I opened up my Adobe Illustrator and I drew everything, and I was like, oh, I can actually do this. This is really cool. And then like, oh, it works. And then then we just kept it because I could.
Well, you sent me a picture and went, "Is this okay?"
Oh yeah, is this all right? Well, I was worried because when you do things on Illustrator, especially when you're doing lettering, you have to zoom in order to make sure that you're getting the position right on the panel, and you're getting the tails of the balloon facing the right mouth and that kind of stuff. Then when you zoom out, it's hard to tell how it looks on the page as a whole, especially if it's a splash page. So I just sent it to her. I was like, does this look all right? Good? Yeah. All right. And then I moved on to the next one. But that was just really fun.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciated getting the messages that were just like, is this all right? And double checking. Because like once I sent the art to him, he could basically do whatever he wanted to it. Mm-hmm. So the fact that he was still checking in was just like, yes, I haven't lost. My baby hasn't been given away.
Well, I mean, how terrible would it be if I just put, I don't know, wingdings as the type of font on every page, and you're like, all right, I don't know why you're murdering my baby, but thank you. And,
yeah.
I translated the whole thing into wingdings.
It's the special wingdings
flying toaster,
edition.
flying toaster. No.
Well, yeah, I guess I if folks are looking to pick this book up, I guess where would they be able to pick it up? If it's on the internet, it's going to be physically printed, I guess. How are you guys getting this book out to folks?
So what we've actually done is we're actually having a book launch of our physical copies at the time of this recording on Tuesday, March 3rd. By the time you've heard this, though, it's already been passed. Our Kickstarter will still be up, so you can actually order it through our Kickstarter, where we can mail out to both North America and to the UK. Even though on the Kickstarter it says only ships to the UK, ignore that. We will mail it to you if you in North America, like Canada.
Yeah, I'll be back in Canada as of next week.
Yeah,
so.
She's back in Canada, so she's going to be mailing it out personally. So you can get a physical copy that way. After we've sold out and after our Kickstarter's done of our physical copies, we are going to be posting it to Comixology, and where you can buy a digital copy from there. And when we sell out of our physical copies, we'll probably try to do another run, which we'll be making an announcement on all of our social media.
One thing that's cool about our Kickstarter, too, is because I can't just stay on one project and I have to keep working and never sleep, is there's a bunch of other artwork that goes around with the theme of the comic book and like kind of delves into some of the other characters. And the alternative cover that we were talking about earlier about when I had my big style change, like spiral into the oblivion, that's on there as an option, as one of the rewards as well. So it's a good way to kind of like see beyond the comic book a little bit.
Yeah, so if you just want to read the book, you can go on Comixology and you can get a digital copy and you can read it on your iPad and you will love the book that way. But if you want all of the goodies, if you want the physical copy, if you want a signed copy, if you want signed postcards, signed covers, you go to our Kickstarter page, and then you can get all the good stuff there.
Very cool. We will make sure to post links to all this stuff in our show notes for the episode, so don't you worry, listener. We've got your back. But I guess we can wrap up here real quick. I mean, where can people find you guys on the internet if they want to check out your other work or future things that you're working on?
For me, you could definitely check out my Instagram, which is just alexis.ironside.
And for me, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Both of them are at Cooper the Writer. And if you want to find out more stuff about our little studio here, it's called Arrow Key Studios. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of that stuff. And it's just Arrow Key Studios, all one word.
Awesome.
And my Twitter, as well, I completely forgot I had one, is A.C. Ironside.
Cool. Yeah, we'll post a bunch of those links in the show notes as well. Well, for now, I guess we'll wrap up here. Nick, you can follow him on Twitter at Death Star Plans. You can follow me at Mike Rapid, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast, where we post news, art, sass, polls, things like that. I was doing polls for the longest time. I stopped. Maybe I should start that up again this year.
This show and our many subscriber-only episodes are powered by fans like you on Patreon. You can join us now at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. And if you haven't already, please rate and review our show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can join us on our Discord at ircbpodcast.com/Discord, and you can make sure to tell a friend or two about the show and just come and hang out with us. We do monthly-ish hangouts where we just sit and talk about comics on the internet. It's pretty fun. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. Xander is a wizard, a good friend, and a great high-fiver. He also edits the show. I want to say thank you to A.C. Ironside, and thank you to Cooper Anderson for being on the show this week. I guess thank you to Nick as well, and thank you to all the listeners out there who listen to the show and talk with us and are just fantastic people. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.
Bye.
Bye.